Support comes from Soaring Heart Natural Beds, where concern for the health and safety of sleep now extends to everything from curbside pickup and delivery to secure in-store appointments. Showrooms in Seattle, Bellevue, and now in Edmonds, or online at soaringheart.com.
Hey, good morning. It's Paige Browning in for Patricia Murphy. It's Tuesday, and this is Seattle Now. All this week, we're wading into the elements. You know, earth, fire, air, water. We're meeting people who are rising to meet the challenges the elements bring. And today, it's a bit peculiar. Puget Sound has dozens, maybe hundreds of boats that have been left to die. They're abandoned, derelict, with no owner or crew. They got to be too much for the owners to maintain and are left adrift. Producer Alec Cowan will bring us that story, but first, let's get you caught up. Seattle City Council just banned the use of tear gas and pepper spray at protests by police. They passed a bill yesterday afternoon that also limits Seattle police use of acoustic weapons or water cannons. It's not a done deal, though. Before any restrictions could take effect, they'll have to be reviewed by the Department of Justice as part of SPD's federal consent decree. Under the ordinance, tear gas would still be allowed in circumstances where it's deemed that a group poses a physical risk to people nearby. The list of COVID-19 cases linked to a country music festival at the Gorge Amphitheater is growing. Public health officials with the Grant County Health District, where the Gorge is, have now tracked 210 cases of people who went to the Watershed Music Festival. If you went, officials are urging you to self-quarantine and get a COVID test. The Brandi Carlile show went on as normal this past weekend, but the next two shows at the Gorge will require vaccination or a negative COVID test result. And Stewie's a mom, which came as a surprise, actually. We know her as basketball showstopper Brianna Stewart of the Seattle Storm, who's considered among the best basketball players of this era. And she and her wife, Marta Sargai, just announced the birth of their daughter, Ruby, through a gestational surrogate. They kept the news of the pregnancy to only a close-knit circle until this week. Congrats, baby Ruby. Now, on with the show.
If you go to one of the many, many marinas around Seattle and the Puget Sound region, you'll see many things. Personally, I love watching mariners sell crab fresh off the docks, and also reading silly and sometimes clever boat names. But if you walk the docks long enough, you'll start to see boats that, well, they don't really fit in.
It could be as bad as missing a mast. It could be, when you just look at a boat, you can tell if the bottom paint is in really bad shape. If the engines come in and it's just smoking or whatever.
That's Carol Tripp, and she's the accountant, treasurer, and executive director at the Port of Poulsbo over on the Kitsap Peninsula. She's talking about dealing with derelict boats, or what are also known by a more ominous name, ghost boats.
There's just telltale signs when you look at a vessel. You can tell that it's going to, it just kind of raises. You look at it and think you need to keep an eye on that one.
Over the last year, Carol has seen an increase in the number of ghost boats staying at the Port of Poulsbo. Sometimes these are boats left anchored and abandoned off the coast. Other times, they're left stuck in marinas across the Puget Sound.
And this is a perfect example that happened earlier this year. Somebody went on to Craigslist. They purchased a boat for $1. And that old adage, there is no such thing as a free boat. It, for whatever reason, had some engine problems. They got... a good Samaritan that was out in the bay, helped them bring it into the port in the evening. The next morning we were out doing our rounds, went ahead, found this vessel that was moored here at the port. Fast forward 2 weeks later, we have contact with the owner, but they're not responding to our replies. We have a boat that we've had to start pumping out now on a regular basis so that it doesn't sink. It's taking water on regularly. So long story short, for this particular individual, the boat was in such bad condition. The person was not willing to take responsibility. They realized that, yes, it was not a free boat. It was in worse shape than what they thought it was. So they ended up just walking away from the boat.
Carol and the Port of Poulsbo aren't alone in this. While ghost boats can look on their face like a problem of neglect or even pollution, the increase in ghost boats is also a reflection of the region's homelessness crisis spilling onto the water. To learn more, I talked with Josh Farley, a reporter at the Kitsap Sun, about the specter of ghost boats and what the marinas and government are doing to understand the problems these boats pose to the region, and where those who own the boats and have to deal with them can go from here. So Josh, you've had your eyes on this story for a while, but I'm first curious what signaled to you that ghost boats were on the rise here in the region.
What I started noticing was when things would get stormy out on Puget Sound, all the sound all around us, particularly, we're reporters, we listen to emergency radios, and I started hearing more boats adrift, started hearing more calls for rescues, and thought it was just kind of odd. So I thought to ask a few of our local marinas, and came to find out that we indeed have a lot more people that are boating on the water, even in the middle of winter, and not all of them are experienced mariners, shall we say.
And you mentioned that these are called ghost boats, and I wonder, is that like a nautical term? Where does that come from?
Yeah, a ghost boat, probably goes by a few definitions. This was a term that was just kind of thrown about by mostly the experienced mariners that deal with such vessels. And it's the basic terminology there is this is a vessel that's unlicensed. Chances are somebody found it on maybe Craigslist for $1 or $10, something very cheap. And then it's in the water, but it has no licensing. Chances are it has no insurance. And so it really doesn't register necessarily back, or at least it registers back to previous owners that took care of the vessel.
And so when people are getting rid of these boats for, you're saying $1, $10, I mean, what's the point of that? Is that strictly just so owners can just find a cheap way out of owning a boat?
Right. Yeah. I've heard the expression a lot that, that the two happiest days of a boater's life are the day you buy the boat and the day you sell it. And so, yeah, I do think there are people that sometimes it's hard to offload a vessel, a boat. And so in this way, it's an easy maybe there's dire financial circumstances. Who knows? They just can't afford to maintain a boat and it goes to someone else. Meanwhile, we're facing, probably the most severe housing shortage and housing crisis in our region. And so you have a lot of people that are looking for somewhere cheap to live. And so this may be one of those solutions for people to get a roof over their heads. Unfortunately, it's also something that is very dangerous if you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah, and say more about that. What are the dangers of this?
Well, the danger is the fact that particularly on those days that are stormy, where I'm learning a lot of my information from was a guy named Eric Hansen that runs a marine towing operation. And so on those days when I would hear on the emergency scanner, I'd hear calls for boats adrift. Once if you're calm seas, if you're on a sailboat or some kind of power vessel, it's probably fine. But when things kick up, people can get kicked into the water real fast. The boat can capsize. We're dealing with cold waters of Puget Sound. It's just not a good situation.
It sounds like these boats are old. They're heavily used, not in perfect working order. I wonder, too, if selling these boats at such a low price is to avoid getting rid of them in a way that they're probably supposed to be. Is there something like a boat junkyard that these boats are preferred to go to when they're out of their usable life?
There is a boat junkyard. And in fact, the state of Washington has a program for derelict vessels that they work hard on this to take in vessels, particularly before they hit the water. So if you're able to get rid of a vessel before it gets into the water, that's a much cheaper prospect than once it's in Puget Sound, right? Once it's in Puget Sound, you're looking at no less than $10,000 in terms of the disposal. Let's say it needs environmental remediation. You're looking at huge costs. It's just going to go up from there. And if it sinks, you can multiply that cost by a lot. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars to dredge it up and then take it somewhere to be disposed of.
Which makes the idea of selling it for $1 that much more attractive, I guess.
Exactly.
So for harbor masters and port authorities, When these boats are left anchored offshore or in their harbor, does that then mean that the costs of those boats, of decommissioning, of any disasters, is then offloaded onto the harbors?
Yeah, that is part of the issue, is that if it can be shown that they are now in possession of the vessel, that they are now bearing some of those costs. The state has a program for this disposal that they'll pay a great majority of the percentage of those costs if they apply for the program. The issue on the state's end, at least earlier this year, was they were out of money to do vessel disposal up until July 1st. So we're past July now, of course, and so they can once again do some of those disposals, and they have a budget for that. But for a while there wasn't anything. And you're right. Port authorities, marinas, when they take on that kind of liability, one situation that I found with some vessels is just kind of a passing of the buck around. A police sergeant in Port Orchard found himself calling literally 10, 15 different agencies, and all kind of pointed the finger around saying, we'll report this, we'll document it, but we're not doing anything more than that, given the extreme sort of the financial costs involved.
So then what are harbor masters doing in that case? I mean, are they doing anything to keep these boats from arriving in the harbors? Are they chasing down owners as much as possible so they can avoid having to front those costs?
If they can't avoid it, they do. They have established funds within their own budgets that they have to do. They have to budget for this, essentially, way more than they ever have before. And they do. They have to put money away, whether the state reimburses them or not, if boats are left behind. The other thing that happens, and this is just a sad reality, is sometimes people who live on board vessels who are paying customers of marina, maybe they pass away, or maybe in of natural causes on the boat. Well, they still now have a boat that they have to find a future for. So that certainly happens, and now we're seeing. I know I talked with the Port of Poulsbo about this specifically, and they just budget for it. And for them, the financial reality of having to budget for that means, it comes down to dollars and cents, and that means maybe there are improvements that will at the docks, at the marinas that they operate, that maybe just don't happen for a little while longer because they're having to deal with an increasing number of these derelict vessels.
So why is this an issue right now? And is that problem of these derelict vessels, is that changing as our region changes?
Yeah, I definitely. Everyone I talk to, harbor masters, police, fire, and other responders, all said that derelict vessels are something that we live with. We live on the shores of the Salish Sea. There's certainly lots of people who like to boat and are out on the water a lot. I think the change has really been that when you have all these vessels during a time where so many people are looking for a place to live, it just affords you. It's kind of like one port manager called it. It's like an RV, except when you're on land, the RV doesn't sink. And so you're just running into. You're taking a risk, and to be honest, many of the rescue operators that go out there and they make their living towing vessels, and most of the time those are paying customers. They have insurance, but when they go out, they're actually have been quite impressed by some of these makeshift mariners, whatever you'd want to call them, that have just gone out there and wanted to learn very, very quickly how to live and how to survive. It's not legal to stay in the state's aquatic lands, but technically speaking, if you keep kind of moving, if you keep going, there are limitations on days, and you can make a go of it. Of course, you might need fuel if you're sailing. Not necessarily, but you can make a living on the cheap to do this. The question is whether they have the experience to make sure that essentially they are not taking too great of a risk in going out in what can be choppy and stormy waters out on Puget Sound.
That was Josh Farley, reporter for the Kitsap Sun. And on a final note today, marinas don't have a surefire way to prevent or deal with derelict boats. And while talking with Carol Tripp from the Port of Poulsbo, she wanted to reaffirm that she understands this is a life choice for many. Living on your boat isn't a bad thing, so long as you're willing to take up the responsibility for it.
Not every boat that is anchored out is a problem boat. Because we have folks that are, for example, we have boats that are out here that are in Liberty Bay. They come into town, they go, they do their shopping, whatever. They're anchored out for, a week or two. They stay out, they do their thing, and then they go off to their next destination. And that's fine. I think that's great. It's your life choice, the lifestyle that you want to have. That's great. But it's the folks that come and they want to anchor out for a month or two. They leave their boat, they park it out there, they don't take care of it. You end up having oil spills. Vessels aren't monitored. Their bilges are dirty. When their bilge pumps come on, then you end up having oil sheens. And that's where I have an issue. I mean, if you look at our breakwater, you'll see seals, their pups, the whole thing out there. We can't be having that kind of thing.
Thanks for listening to Seattle Now. And if you're on Instagram, there is more to this show. Check out photos of smoke-tainted wine and ghost ships on our feed. Hit follow at Seattle Now Pod. Alec Cowan produced today's show. Our production team this week is Alec Cowan, Brandy Fullwood, Jenny Cecil-Moore, Kristen Leong, Sarah Leibovitz, and Diana Opong. Matt Jorgensen does our theme music. I'm Paige Browning. See you tomorrow.
Hey, Bill Radke here to remind you that KUOW has been bringing you the news since 1952 and even helped found the National Public Radio Network in the 70s. August 20th is National Radio Day, so we're taking a moment to celebrate the legacy of public radio and the community of supporters who make it all possible. Help us celebrate by sharing why you love public radio, or become a new member at just $5 per month to sustain this service for the next generation of listeners. Visit KUOW.org/radio.